The rain clawed at the windows like desperate fingers, the wind screaming through the cracks of the old apartment building. Inside, Sarah sat motionless in the dim glow of her phone. The air in the room was stifling, thick with the kind of silence that felt alive, watching, waiting. It had been a week since Rachel's funeral, but the memory of the coffin lowering into the ground felt closer than ever, like a shadow that refused to leave. Tonight, though, something was different. The rain's relentless tapping seemed almost rhythmic, like a code or a message whispered just beyond comprehension. The cold draft slithered through the apartment, making the shadows on the walls shiver and twist. Sarah's heart jumped when her phone buzzed, the sound slicing through the quiet. She stared at the screen. One new voicemail from Sarah. Her own name. The notification sent a chill racing down her spine. She hadn't called herself. She couldn't have. Yet there it was, stark and impossible on the glowing screen. Her stomach knotted. There was no missed call, only the voicemail. The timestamp read 9:44 p.m. Her breath caught as she remembered hearing a soft creak by the front door earlier. At the time, she had dismissed it, forcing herself to rationalize it as the old building settling, or perhaps the wind pressing against the door. But deep down, it hadn't felt right. The sound had been too deliberate, too precise. A slow, strained groan of wood bending underweight, as if someone, or something, had been leaning against the other side. She had frozen in place when it happened, holding her breath as her ears strained to catch any further noises. But the silence that followed was almost worse. A heavy, pressing quiet that seemed to whisper that something was waiting just beyond the door. With a trembling hand, she pressed the phone to her ear. The robotic voice intoned, "You have one new message, received today at 9:44 p.m. A deep primal fear took hold of her. Everything inside screamed to delete it, to throw the phone away. But she couldn't. She had to know. She tapped play. A crackle of static erupted, sharp and grating. Then a voice, distorted but unmistakable. Sarah's blood turned to ice. "Sarah," the voice whispered. It was Rachel. "Don't open the door," the voice continued, trembling with urgency. "It's already here. Whatever you do, don't let it in." The message ended with a burst of static so loud it felt like it screamed directly into her skull. Sarah's phone slipped from her grasp, clattering onto the table. The shadows in the room seemed to ripple and grow heavier, pressing in on her. Outside, the streetlight flickered once, twice, and died, plunging the apartment into near total darkness. And then, the knock. 3 soft taps, deliberate, measured. The sound echoed through the room, chilling her to her core. Sarah froze, her breath caught in her throat. Slowly, her eyes drifted to the door. The peephole was a dark void. There should have been light from the hallway, but there was nothing. Her phone buzzed again, vibrating angrily on the table. A new notification. One new voicemail. Her hands shook as she pressed play. The phone felt heavy, like holding a loaded gun. "Sarah," Rachel's voice pleaded, trembling with desperation. "It knows you're alone. Don't make a sound. It's waiting for you to answer." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. This wasn't possible. Rachel was gone. She had seen her buried, and yet the voice was hers, unmistakable. The knocks came again, louder this time, shaking the fragile door in its frame. Sarah stumbled back, clutching her chest as the air grew colder, heavier, oppressive. The phone was a lifeline she could barely hold. Her trembling fingers jabbed at the screen, desperate to dial 911. The glowing numbers mocked her before the call dissolved into static, the screen flickering like the pulse of something dying. The line never connected. Instead, her phone buzzed violently, rattling across the table like a living thing. One new voicemail. "Stop calling for help," Rachel's voice hissed, sharp and frantic. "You have to stay quiet. Don't let it hear you." Sarah's stomach twisted as bile rose in her throat. The voice felt alive, like Rachel herself was whispering directly into her ear from a place she could not reach. The silence that followed was suffocating, but it lasted only seconds. Then, the pounding began again. This time, it was worse. The door groaned under the assault, each blow echoing like the strike of a battering ram. The entire apartment trembled, the vibrations rattling the floor beneath her feet. The walls quivered, picture frames crashing to the ground, their glass splintering into jagged teeth. The sound wasn't human. Each thud carried a weight and fury that made the air hum with malevolence. Sarah staggered back, clutching the counter as her legs threatened to give out. Her chest heaved, her heartbeat drowning out her thoughts. This wasn't someone trying to break in. This was something trying to tear its way through. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. A slow, deliberate scratching began at the door. Nails dragged across wood, the sound grating and unrelenting. Sarah's breath came in shallow gasps as she pressed herself against the wall, every instinct screaming to run, but there was nowhere to go. Her phone buzzed again, its glow an unwelcome beacon in the darkness. Another voicemail. Her shaking fingers hovered over the screen before she hit play. "It's inside," Rachel's voice whispered, faint and hollow. The words made her blood run cold. Slowly, against every instinct, she turned her head. On the corner of the room, the shadows writhed, thick and unnatural, pooling like oil. From the darkness, a figure emerged, tall, impossibly thin, its limbs twisted and contorted in grotesque angles. Its glowing eyes pierced through the gloom, locking onto hers. Sarah's scream caught in her throat as the thing began to move. Its jerky, disjointed steps, accompanied by a wet, guttural sound that made her stomach churn. The phone slipped from her hand, clattering to the floor as the creature surged forward. She bolted, her bare feet skidding on the hardwood floor. The creature followed, its limbs scraping against the wall, a sound like nails on a chalkboard. Sarah stumbled into the kitchen, grabbing the first thing she could, a knife. She spun to face it, her back pressed against the cold cabinets. The shadow halted at the threshold, its form seeping into the walls like smoke. Its glowing eyes never wavered, fixed on her with a hunger that made her skin crawl. "What do you want?" she screamed, her voice cracking. The shadow raised one elongated hand and pointed. Sarah's eyes followed the gesture to her phone, which lay on the floor, still buzzing with relentless notifications. Tears streamed down her face as she bent to pick up the phone, her entire body trembling. She pressed play on the newest voicemail, her breath hitching as Rachel's voice filled the room once more. "It's you," the voice said, cold and devoid of emotion. "You let it in the night I died. You ignored my calls. And now it's your turn." The memory struck her like a physical blow. Rachel's frantic calls that she had ignored, too tired, too distracted to answer. Guilt swallowed her whole as the shadow crept closer, its form growing darker, larger, more oppressive. The lights flickered violently before dying completely. The room was plunged into absolute darkness, save for the faint glow of her phone. The shadow surged forward, enveloping her in its icy grasp. Her scream was swallowed by the darkness. When the police arrived the next morning, the apartment was eerily still. The door was locked from the inside. The windows were sealed. There were no signs of a struggle. Sarah was gone. Her phone lay face up on the floor, its screen displaying one final voicemail notification. One new message